It was 12:07 a.m. when my phone vibrated on the nightstand, the soft glow of the screen cutting through the darkness of my bedroom. I had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind restless, drowning in thoughts I shouldn't be having. When I picked up my phone, my breath caught in my throat. Her name, illuminated on the screen like a forbidden promise. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the notification. Then I read the message. Come over. Now. He's not home. 3 short sentences. Simple. Direct. Dangerous. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. She was playing with fire. We both were. Every single time I got one of these messages, I told myself it would be the last. That I wouldn't cross the line again. That I wasn't the kind of man who did this. And yet every time, I found myself walking straight into the flames. I glanced at the clock again. 12:08 nachts. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to ignore it, to turn off my phone and forget she ever existed. But then I imagined her, waiting, alone, wrapped in nothing but temptation and sin. The thought made my body tense. My fingers moved before my brain could catch up. Mobile phone with arrow on my way. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and stepped out into the night, my heart pounding like a war drum. This time felt different. I just didn't know why yet. The drive to her house felt longer than usual. The roads were empty, the city asleep, but inside me, everything was alive, buzzing with anticipation, pulsing with danger. My fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too tight. Every red light, every empty intersection, felt like the universe was giving me one last chance to turn back. But I didn't. I never did. Her house sat at the end of a quiet street, nestled between shadows and secrets. I parked a block away just in case. I always did. Not because I thought he'd come home early, but because I couldn't afford to be reckless. Not with her. My footsteps were silent as I moved through the backyard, the damp grass soft beneath my shoes. The porch light was off. Good. That meant she was already waiting. I reached the back door and pressed my fingers against the cold handle. It was unlocked, just like always. I slipped inside, the air instantly thick with the scent of her. Vanilla, jasmine, and something darker. Something dangerous. And then I saw her, standing at the bottom of the stairs, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. She was draped in silk the color of midnight, a robe so delicate it barely clung to her curves, teasing more than it concealed. Her bare legs crossed at the ankles, one hand resting on the railing, the other holding a glass of deep red wine. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her lips curled into that familiar, mischievous smile, the one that told me I was exactly where I shouldn't be. I exhaled slowly, stepping closer. The door clicked shut behind me, locking me inside this beautiful, treacherous moment. As I reached for her, she took a slow sip of wine, letting the deep crimson stain her lips before whispering, "You have no idea what you're getting into." Her breath was warm against my neck, her fingers tracing slow, lazy circles on my chest. And for the first time, I felt something different, not just desire, something darker, something I should have paid attention to. The room was electric. The space between us had vanished, and I could feel the warmth of her body pressing against mine. The silk of her robe slid against my fingertips as I traced the curve of her waist, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. She leaned in, her breath hot against my skin, her lips grazing the edge of my jaw. "I've been waiting for you all night," she murmured, her voice dripping with promise. I shouldn't have been there. Every rational thought in my mind screamed for me to walk away. But the way she looked at me, asterisk, asterisk, like I was the only man in the world, asterisk, asterisk, made it impossible. I grabbed her waist, pulling her closer, her body molding against mine. My lips hovered inches from hers when A sharp, sudden noise cut through the silence like a knife. Upstairs, my entire body stiffened. My pulse slammed against my ribs. He wasn't supposed to be home. The sound wasn't just a random house creak. It was movement. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I pulled back, my adrenaline spiking. What the hell was that? I whispered, my voice low but sharp. She didn't flinch. She didn't even turn to look. Instead, she lifted a single, delicate finger and placed it against my lips. Relax, she whispered, her voice like silk. It's not what you think. I stared at her, my heart still hammering in my chest. How could she be so calm? Another noise. A low, distant thud. I swallowed hard, my instincts screaming at me to get out. But she just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. She knew something I didn't. And for the first time since I walked through that door, I felt afraid. The silence after the second noise was suffocating. Every muscle in my body tensed, my heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then footsteps, slow, measured, coming from the hallway above. My breath hitched. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, still pressed against me, her fingers still lingering on my lips like this was all part of some twisted game. Who is that? My voice came out low, almost a growl. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I told you relax. Relax? How the hell could I relax? The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs one slow, deliberate step at a time. Whoever was up there wanted us to hear them. I took an instinctive step back, my mind racing through possibilities. Her husband? No, she was too calm for that. A burglar? Someone she knew? Then I saw it, the shadow, stretching across the dimly lit floor, long and distorted, moving toward us like a silent threat. I clenched my fists, my breath shallow. And then he appeared, tall, broad shoulders, a presence that filled the room before he even fully stepped into view. He was dressed in dark jeans and a half-unbuttoned black shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal toned forearms, veins visible under his skin. But it was his expression that made my blood run cold. A smirk, not of surprise, not of anger, of amusement, like he'd been expecting this, like he knew something I didn't. His piercing gaze flicked between me and her, then back to me, his smirk widening just slightly. Well, his voice was smooth, edged with something unreadable. Look what we have here. My stomach twisted. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem startled. She just reached for her wine glass, took a slow sip, then turned to him with a playful smile. You're late. My skin prickled. Late? She knew he was coming. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. I walked into something I didn't understand. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was the one playing the game, or if I was the prize. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. My breath was shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. The man, Jake, apparently, stood just a few feet away, his smirk never wavering, his presence filling the space like he owned it. I braced myself for confrontation. A fight, a scream, a violent explosion of anger. That's how these things were supposed to go, right? Instead, he did something that sent ice through my veins. He walked right past me, without a single glance. And then he kissed her. Not hesitantly, not cautiously. He kissed her like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Like he owned her. Her hand slid up his chest, fingers curling around the collar of his shirt as she deepened the kiss, her body molding against his like I wasn't even in the room. The floor beneath me felt like it was shifting. My stomach twisted. My throat went dry. What the hell was happening? I took a step back, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an affair. This was something else. Something worse. Who the hell is this? The words slipped from my mouth before I could stop them. My voice was sharp, but inside I was unraveling. Slowly, too slowly, she pulled away from him. Her lips were still curved in that same knowing smile, the one that had drawn me in from the start. She turned to me, tilting her head slightly, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Meet Jake," she said, her voice like velvet. "He knows everything." The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Everything? A lump formed in my throat. I had spent weeks, months, thinking I was part of some forbidden secret, that she was sneaking around behind her husband's back, taking risks because she couldn't resist me. Now, standing here, watching her wrap her arms around Jake like this was normal, I realized something sickening. I wasn't the one she was sneaking around with. I was the one being played. Jake turned toward me, still smirking, but now there was something darker behind his eyes. "You thought you were the only one, didn't you?" he said, shaking his head. "Man, that's cute." A cold, sinking feeling clawed at my chest. I had been so damn blind, and now, for the first time, I wondered, was I the first? Or just the next? Jake leaned against the kitchen counter like he had all the time in the world, completely at ease, like this was his house, like I was the guest or worse, the entertainment. His arms folded across his chest, the faintest trace of amusement curling his lips. "We've been watching you," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. I felt a sharp prick of adrenaline. "We?" My eyes darted to her. She was still standing close to him, watching me with that same infuriating, unreadable smile. She looked entertained, like this was a game. My stomach twisted. "Watching me," I repeated, my voice harsher than I intended. "What the hell does that mean?" Jake let out a low chuckle, shaking his head as if I was some naive fool who just stumbled into a world he didn't understand. "She likes danger," he mused, eyes flicking toward her. She smirked, biting her bottom lip like she enjoyed the attention. "But you're not the only one she plays with." The words slammed into me like a freight train. Not the only one. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I had spent months believing I was part of something illicit, something thrilling and forbidden, that I was the risk she was taking. But now I realized I wasn't the one in control. I was the one being hunted. "Bullshit," I muttered, my jaw tightening. "You're messing with me." Jake exhaled sharply, almost like he pitied me. "Am I?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a sleek, black phone. He tapped the screen, swiped a few times, then turned it toward me. I took a step forward, and my blood ran cold. There on the screen was me. Video footage. Crystal clear. Me sneaking through her back door. Me pressed up against her in this very kitchen. Me thinking I was in control. But it wasn't just one video. It was dozens. Different nights. Different moments. Different angles. I staggered back, my mind spinning. They had cameras. Everywhere. My hands curled into fists. What the hell is this? Jake grinned. "Proof." He slid the phone back into his pocket. "You're part of something now," he said smoothly, stepping closer. "Something bigger than you. And trust me," he tilted his head slightly, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. "You don't want to walk away." Her hand slid down Jake's arm, her nails tracing lazy circles against his skin as she whispered, "Not yet." And just like that, I realized something even worse than the betrayal. Something that sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't trapped because of the cameras. I was trapped because, deep down, I didn't want to leave. Jake took his time, his smirk never fading as he lifted his hand and pointed casually toward the far corner of the room. "You really should have paid more attention." I followed his gaze, my breath hitching in my throat. And then I saw it. A tiny red light. Blink, blink, blink. A camera. My stomach dropped. How long had that been there? I took a step back, my mind spinning. My pulse roared in my ears, a deafening, chaotic drumbeat. "Every time you came over." she murmured, her voice dripping with amusement. We saw everything. Her words slithered through the air, wrapping around my throat like a noose. Everything. Every whispered conversation. Every stolen touch. Every forbidden night. Captured. Recorded. Kept. My mouth went dry. Why? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. What the hell do you want from me? She exchanged a look with Jake, something silent passing between them, something I wasn't meant to understand. How many others had they done this to? That thought hit me like a sledgehammer to the ribs. I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell wouldn't be the last. I forced myself to breathe, to think. My hand drifted toward the table where my phone was face down next to my keys. My fingers curled around the cool metal, and beneath the table, out of sight, I unlocked the screen. Mobile phone with arrow, new message, Detective Carter. I typed with my thumb, my heart pounding so hard I swore they could hear it. I need your help. Now. I hit send. The message delivered. No read receipt. I swallowed hard, praying he would answer. Carter wasn't just any detective. He was the only person who ever warned me about her. Months ago, back when this whole thing started, I had bumped into him outside a bar. He wasn't in uniform, wasn't working, but the way he looked at me, like he already knew, had made my skin crawl. Stay away from that woman. His voice had been low, serious. She's trouble. I had laughed it off, thought he was exaggerating. Now I knew he had been right, and I was drowning in the very thing he tried to save me from. The phone buzzed in my hand, the vibration so sudden that I nearly dropped it. Carter's name flashed on the screen. I clicked it open, keeping the phone low, out of their sight. One word. Where? A surge of hope crashed through my panic. I typed back fast, my hands shaking. Mobile phone with arrow, her house. Something's wrong. Cameras. Not alone. The second I hit send, I forced my face into something neutral. My only chance of getting out of this was to play along until Carter showed up. Jake stepped forward, his eyes glinting under the dim light. You're not as smart as you think you are, he murmured. I clenched my jaw, shoving my phone into my pocket, keeping my body language controlled. He didn't know. He couldn't know. I forced out a breath. Then tell me, Jake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly is it that you and your little camera crew want? Her laughter was soft, almost affectionate. She stepped closer, tracing a delicate finger down the front of my shirt. You'll find out soon enough. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The cameras weren't just about watching me. They were about keeping me. It hit me like a freight train, slamming into my chest with the force of something I should have seen coming. I wasn't special. I wasn't her secret. I wasn't the risk she was taking. I was just a pawn, a piece in a game that had been playing out long before I stepped onto the board. I felt sick. The betrayal ran deeper than I could process. Every touch, every stolen glance, every whispered word that made me feel like I was walking on the edge of something forbidden. It had all been a lie. And then, knock, knock, knock. The sound shattered the heavy silence in the room. Not a soft tap, not a hesitant knock. Loud, forceful, authoritative. Jake and the woman I had once believed was mine, exchanged a glance. For the first time, the amusement in their eyes faltered. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. And then, despite the chaos in my chest, despite the fear clawing up my spine, I smirked. Expecting someone? Jake's jaw tightened. He reached behind his back with practiced ease, and before I could react, he pulled out a sleek, black pistol, the metal glinting under the low light. Who the hell did you call? My heart nearly stopped. The weight of the gun in his hand changed the air in the room instantly. Everything slowed. I kept my expression locked in place, but inside, my mind was running a mile a minute. I had expected intimidation, maybe another mind game, but this was different. Jake's eyes were darker now, the smirk completely gone. He wasn't playing anymore. The woman stepped forward, her robe slipping slightly off one shoulder. But this time, there was no seduction behind it. Only calculation. "Answer him," she said softly, tilting her head. "Who did you call?" I held my hands up slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "No one. Why would I?" Jake took a step closer, the gun barely shifting, but it didn't need to. "You think I'm an idiot?" he said, his tone sharper now, all amusement gone. Another knock at the door. Louder this time. "Police! Open up!" Jake's head snapped toward the door, and in that split second of distraction, I moved. Fast! I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy whiskey glass from the counter, and hurled it at him. The glass shattered against his shoulder, making him curse as I lunged for the front door. The woman let out a sharp breath, not a scream, not panic, but frustration. Like I was ruining something, like I was supposed to play along. Jake recuffed fast. Too fast. Before I could reach the door, I felt fingers wrap around my wrist, tight, unrelenting. The woman yanked me back, nails digging into my skin, her lips right against my ear. "You should have just enjoyed the game," she whispered, her breath hot, before it turned deadly. Bang! The door burst open. Detective Carter stepped inside, his gun already drawn, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. "Drop it," he barked. For the first time, Jake hesitated. His fingers flexed around the gun, his jaw locked tight. The woman, however, simply smiled. Slow, almost proud, like she knew something I didn't. I was gasping for breath, my wrists stinging from her grip, my body shaking with adrenaline. And in that moment, as Carter's gun stayed trained on Jake, as I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me, one horrifying thought burned through my brain. This wasn't over. Not even close. The front door creaked open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air in the room felt thick, charged with something heavy, something dark. And then a voice. Deep, steady, unshaken. "Detective Carter, we need to have a chat." For a moment, no one moved. Jake's grip on the gun tightened. His jaw locked, his knuckles white around the handle. But it was her who caught my attention. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. Instead, she smiled. Slow, calculated, like she was enjoying this. Her silk robe barely clung to her shoulders now, her exposed collarbone illuminated by the dim kitchen light. She tilted her head slightly toward Jake, her voice a whisper of amusement. "Put that away, Jake," she murmured. "He doesn't have proof yet." Yet. The word sent a chill through my spine. Jake's fingers twitched around the gun, his entire body tense, but after a long beat, he lowered it. Not all the way, just enough. Enough to say he wasn't giving in. Carter stepped inside, his presence filling the space like an approaching storm. His eyes, cold, calculating, predatory, scanned the room, missing nothing. His gaze flicked to me, then to her. Then Jake. "I've been tracking your little games." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a razor-sharp undertone that sent shivers through my already frayed nerves. The hidden cameras, the blackmail, the missing men. My stomach churned. Missing men? That was new. That was terrifying. Jake smirked, shaking his head slightly. "You're reaching, Detective." Carter ignored him. He turned his attention to me. "Do you even know what you're caught up in?" he asked, his voice lower now. "Do you have any idea what they do to men like you?" I swallowed hard. No, I didn't. I thought I was having an affair. I thought I was breaking the rules. I thought I was wanted. But this was something else. Something much, much worse. Jake sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw, almost bored now, like we were wasting his time. "All right, Carter," he said, exhaling slowly. "Let's cut the bullshit. What do you want?" Carter took a step closer, his gaze locked on Jake like a lion stalking prey. "I wanted to tell me where the bodies are." Bodies. The word knocked the breath out of me. This wasn't just about cheating, cameras, or blackmail. This was bigger. This was deadly. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. He turned to her, nudging her chin up with his finger, his voice taunting. "Look at that, sweetheart. He thinks we're killers now." She giggled softly, like this was funny. I felt sick. Carter's jaw tightened. He wasn't playing their game. He reached into his coat, pulling out a folded piece of paper, and threw it onto the kitchen counter. It slid across the smooth surface, stopping in front of Jake. Jake glanced down at it, his smirk fading slightly. He picked it up, unfolding it. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tensed. So did hers. She wasn't smiling anymore. I glanced at the paper from where I stood, my hands still shaking. It was a list. Names. Men's names. And at the very bottom, mean it. My vision blurred. My knees felt weak. I looked up at Carter, panic rising in my chest like wildfire. "What the hell is this?" My voice cracked. Carter held my gaze. "You were next." I felt the room tilt. "Next? Next for what?" Jake chuckled, shaking his head, but this time there was something harder in his expression. Less amusement, more frustration. Like Carter had just ruined something. Like I wasn't supposed to know this much. The woman sighed dramatically, stepping forward and tracing her nails across my chest. Her touch was slow, deliberate. "You really should have just played along," she purred. I barely heard her. My mind was spinning. Carter's voice broke through the haze. "I suggest you come with me." I barely had time to react before Jake did something I wasn't expecting. He grinned, wide and sharp. Then he flicked his eyes toward her. And she smiled back. A private moment. A secret language. Then, the lights went out. The room was swallowed in darkness. A rush of movement. A sharp gasp. Then, nothing. The moment the lights flickered back on, my pulse slammed against my ribs. Jake was gone. The woman stood by the door now, her back pressed lazily against the wood, one arm draped across her waist while the other toyed with a delicate gold necklace around her throat. The only thing separating me from freedom was her. Carter exhaled sharply, stepping closer to me, his jaw set in a tight line. His voice was low, firm. "We're getting out of here. Now." I nodded, my body moving before my brain could catch up. I turned toward the door, heart hammering, my fingers itching to grasp the handle. And then, click, the sound echoed through the room, far too loud in the silence. I stopped mid-step. My breath hitched. Slowly, too slowly, I turned back toward her. She had locked it. Her lips curved upward, that familiar siren smile returning as she let her hand drop from the lock. "Leaving so soon?" she murmured, tilting her head like she was genuinely disappointed. A chill crawled up my spine. I took a slow, deliberate step back, but she pushed away from the door, matching my movement. Her bare feet whispered against the floor. The silky robe she wore barely clung to her shoulders, swaying slightly as she moved. She was calm, too calm, as if this was still a game. Her nails trailed down my chest, slow, teasing, like she was savoring the moment. "Oh, detective," she sighed, but her eyes were locked onto mine. Sharp, glowing with something dangerous. She smiled wider. "You should have known." My stomach twisted. Know what? Her lips parted, her voice smooth as silk. "The fun's just getting started." Carter moved first. His hand shot to his holster, pulling his gun free in a smooth motion, his fingers steady on the trigger. "Move! Now!" His voice was steel, cutting through the tension like a blade. The woman's gaze flicked toward him, unbothered. If anything, she seemed amused. "Oh, Carter," she purred. "You really think I'd let you just walk out?" Something in her tone sent a spike of fear through me. She wasn't bluffing. Something was coming. Carter's grip on his gun tightened. His jaw locked, his stance firm. Last chance, he warned, his voice low. Move, or I make you. She only smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Then the lights cut out again. Total. Black. I sucked in a sharp breath, my hands flying forward, searching for something, anything, in the darkness. A sound. Movement. Then a whisper. Too close. You should have played along. A sharp pain, cold metal against my throat. I froze. My breath shuddered out of me as my mind raced. Carter's voice barked through the darkness. Let him go. The pressure in my throat increased, not cutting but threatening. And then, another sound. Rushed footsteps. A scuffle. A grunt. The air shifted. A presence moving away from me. A loud crash. I turned toward the sound, but then, the lights flashed back on. The woman was gone. The door was open. Carter stood a few feet away, his chest heaving, his gun still raised, but his target had vanished. I exhaled sharply, my hands still shaking as I stumbled toward him. He turned, his gaze locking onto mine. We need to move. Now. I nodded, stepping past the threshold, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. As we reached the front porch, I risked one last glance back inside. The house was silent, too silent, like it was waiting, and somewhere, deep in the shadows of the empty room, a red light blinked. Recording, still watching, still playing the game. And in that moment, as I stepped into the night, my breath still shaky, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. Not even close.